In a world where DEI feels lost and inclusion is becoming a bad word, we are having real conversations about leadership through the lenses of diverse voices.
As generational and neurodiversity advocates, we are disrupting that sense of dissonance and navigating a path towards personal empowerment, conscious leadership, and organizational success.
By leveraging evidence-based practices rooted in neuroscience, we can nurture a flourishing workplace culture where every diversity thrives.
We are your hosts, Sherri Dockery
and Nicki Straza.
Welcome to the Dissonance Disrupted podcast. Welcome back. Today I'm excited because on Dissonance Disrupted, we have invited Kathleen Foldvari to join us. Kathleen, I'm thrilled to have you join. We had a wonderful time at your event last week. That need for mental health awareness in the community is a piece that is important. Why don't you first start off maybe by introducing yourself to everybody, because I'm sure that you will do a better job of sharing what you do and how you do it.
For sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, Sherri and Nicki. Of course, I'm Kathleen. I'm a social worker by training. I am a practicing psychotherapist in the community. I'm also the founder of A Minute for Mental Health. My focus as a clinician has been trauma-informed work, specifically for BIPOC populations, but also for people who work in helping professions. I've worked with healthcare professionals, I've worked with educators, first responders, and the leaders who lead those teams. And that has led me to my work as a founder to create better access and create mental health education that's preventative, so that we're not seeing as many people in helping professions, leaders especially, burning out, feeling they aren't able to keep up with the work or continue to do the work that they are still passionate about, feel like isn't sustainable. That's now my mission in life, to be able to turn that into something positive for our community.
That's awesome. And I know that you come with the experience around this because we met originally was through your role with a healthcare organization, and you were specifically doing wellness for the healthcare organization. So you have that experience coming from being right out there in the trenches, and then also being a founder, which is, it's a different set of skills needed, but also brings a lot of the same challenges in the workplace that you might have experienced and that somebody else might experience into your own practice as well, no doubt.
Absolutely. All of that experience has been a great opportunity to learn where our system can support the staff and the helpers in our community, also where the gaps are. So all of the feedback and the conversations that I've had and the teams that I've supported, all the information I've taken into create tools and resources that meet their needs. And of course, I'm always in the mindset of being able to continue to learn and keep up with the needs of the population. It's ever evolving, ever changing in our landscape. It was mid-pandemic when we met and tried to collaborate as internal supports and external supports to be able to meet needs of the staff at all angles. And oh my goodness, how things changed from that period of time through today. And I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve as we move forward.
So as I think about your experiences specifically, I think about communication in organizations for leaders. That trauma-informed care piece that you talked about is so important. And I think most people don't really understand, they think of it as, what do you talk about to your therapist? But I love that you recognize how important that is to leadership. And so I'm really curious if you can share a little bit of insight. How did you put those two together and recognize how important they are?
Very good question. I think a lot of it has been in bits and pieces in terms of where did I learn, how important are the benefits of being able to approach from a trauma-informed lens as a social worker. I think I took for granted how open we are in those conversations in that profession to be able to talk about trauma, to be able to talk about post-traumatic growth and how we utilize that in practice, not realizing that people outside of that field, maybe more so in others, less so in some, how stigmatized talking about our traumas, about our mental health still is. And a lot of what I hear from people who haven't been exposed to that type of language, that trauma-informed practice, is that they don't even know that they've been or experienced trauma, or they create this idea of a trauma hierarchy. Well, what I've gone through isn't as bad as somebody else, so therefore I'm not traumatized, and creating some of that emotional reasoning. And realizing that when you have that clarity, when you have that education, what trauma-informed practice is, it gives you more self-awareness, and it helps you relate to your team in a very different way. And then being able to take the education provided, observing the team and how they're functioning more fluidly, more sustainably, share that with the next group. It creates this insight and this pattern of, oh, I see that the light bulbs go off in terms of where that vulnerability can really be beneficial, as scary as it might be initially.
I think you raised some really insightful points. And what stood up for me in what you shared is that kind of tendency to dismiss our trauma. It's less than other people have gone through. It's maybe not, in the category of trauma in our own minds. How that avoidance of acknowledging that trauma, how does that impact how we lead?
That is a very good question. And it all starts with the baseline of awareness. One of my favorite quotes is, awareness is the seed, reflection is the water. Being able to be aware first starts with you being able to acknowledge your experience and being able to receive and self-validate around what that is, where my trauma is my trauma, my experience is my experience. I don't need to compare that to anyone else's. We can share our experiences once we've come to an understanding of what our experience has been, how it's impacted us, and how we want to achieve that post-traumatic growth. That shouldn't be the starting point where you're looking to other people to see where or how much you should be reflecting. You do need that baseline self-acknowledgement to be able to do anything with it eventually. People get scared putting themselves out there. They get scared of criticism. I think, unfortunately, stigma is still alive and well, and that's what leads people back to that. Well, you know what, my trauma isn't as important as somebody else's, or I should be able to push through and just figure it out on my own. And that can be such a disservice to our leadership. Again, going back to the idea of awareness, is that once you've been able to understand your journey, the narrative, you can then relate to other people, your team members, the people you serve, so much more authentically, with so much more clarity. And it gives you the tools and the blueprint to be able to support them, understand their trauma responses, understand their needs, to know what you talked about before in terms of the curiosity piece and how we explore not just our own selves, but the world and the people around us. Our emotions, our experiences, it's not something that you can selectively turn off and on. I can't pick bits and pieces of my story. Otherwise, people will pick up on that inauthenticity, or it might not be clear when it comes across. People want to know that you're just as human as they are. And that means the full spectrum of their experience, the bad and the ugly. That all creates the humanity that we share to one another.
So it's really good reflection when you think about the fact that as leaders, we tend to feel like we have to have it all together for everyone else, right? We think that that's what our team wants. Mm-hmm. We need to be in control and, keep calm and carry on in the face of every crisis, regardless of what turmoil we're going through personally. And I think that sort of shift to, can we reflect about what trauma actually does? How is it showing up? And I know for myself, and this is kind of I'm about to dismiss this level of trauma as I'm talking. So I'm recognizing that.
There's some self-awareness.
There's some self-awareness. But years ago, when I worked in the corporate sector, I remember that outside of one of my locations, there was a very bad motorcycle accident. And I don't know what it is that possesses me, but I was the very first person to get there. And the individual was very badly hurt. And although I've worked in the healthcare sector for years and seen things that most people, I say, would probably curl their hair, the experience of that did leave me with a level of trauma that I did not recognize. And so I went about my day and the rest of my week. And it wasn't until the following week, we were out for dinner with friends of ours. And a friend of my girlfriend said, "Are you okay?" And I kind of thought to myself, "I'm fine. Why?" But whatever it was enough that she would see it. Like, she recognized it in me when I didn't recognize it in myself, which was kind of shocking to me. But it made me reflect on that and that brief moment of, wow, maybe that had a little more impact than I realized. And it was a motorcycle accident. And it's funny how our brains work, because to this day, if I hear a motorcycle go by that guns, and he didn't, it wasn't, but somehow in my brain, it made this correlation. I hear somebody go by on a crotch rocket and they gun the engine. And I'm like, I literally even saying it, the chills are going down my spine right now. So when I think about that, obviously that's different context now, but at the time, I think they went back to work and it never occurred to me. So my girlfriend saw it in a very short window. Of course, she knew me quite well. How is that going to show up? How did that likely or possibly show up to my team? Or what would be things that a team might have seen that they wouldn't necessarily even know? That as a leader, I was dealing with some trauma. I don't know if you have some insights around that might be really helpful, because I think if we can uncover some of those, it's maybe some self-awareness.
For sure. Yeah. And the example that you've shared in your own life and your own experience is actually very common. I hear that a lot, where somebody's been exposed to a form of trauma, and it's almost like they default back to that autopilot. I've got to push through. I'm okay. And they convince themselves that they're okay until it's starting to manifest through their body and their reactions, where physically maybe their immune system is taxed and they're getting sick more often. Their fatigue sets in, foggy brain, all those different kind of things, especially when you factor in other neurodivergence, for example, and the ADHD brain freeze. You're getting brain zaps and you don't know why until somebody can stop you in your tracks. And it's almost like that's a glass shatter moment when somebody calls you out on it or is noticing things you haven't noticed before. It gives you permission to say, whoa, what's going on here? To take a step back and retrace your steps as to how long you've been feeling this way and what your mind and your body might need and what to pay attention to. I don't think there's one single answer as to why that happens for people, leaders in particular, but I do think it has something to do with what you just mentioned, that idea of that like expectation of having it all figured out. And we don't realize how much that wires us to do just that, and how that actually takes away from our self-awareness to be in tune with what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think this work is so important and this conversation is so important, so that we can help attune people to those signs and symptoms. And so that when we are needing our support system and people being things out that they're noticing with us, changes in our facial expressions, our body language, and how we're coming across, that we're not taking it as a negative, as a failure, as a, oh my goodness, I must not be a good leader, there's something wrong with me, but rather taking it as a gift. Thank goodness I have people who know my true self and can tell when I'm not myself, and who feel comfortable enough to point that out to me. That shows a sign of care, and that shows a sign of leadership, that you've created that community of support and people being attuned to each other. We need that. We're social creatures for a reason. We're not meant to do this all by ourselves, and there's not meant to be that one person on the team who has it all figured out, never gets affected by anything. We talk about the lateral or the horizontal leadership, where we are all humans with our own skills and our gifts and our talents to offer. And we can't achieve that if we're putting ourselves on these pedestals of expectation, and then without being able to challenge the idea of stepping off of it or giving other people a chance to show leadership in other ways. I saw a quote that came across my social media earlier today, and it said, "Be the leader
that makes it really hard to tell who the leader is in the room, where everybody has that strength and has that trust in themselves, the confidence to be able to leadership skills, show leadership in some way based on their talents, and giving other people opportunity by just being your human self, being imperfect, having days where you struggle more than others, having days where you do feel really confident, and being able to model what it looks like to reach out for support and help. That's one thing that I noticed, especially in the healthcare system, where leaders were focused on getting their team support, their staff support. Meanwhile, the staff are thinking, oh my goodness, I'm worried about my leader. Are they okay? Yeah. And what they're looking for is someone to give them permission through modeling. Yes, I'm a leader. I'm also human. I also struggle with trauma, mental health. I have a certain capacity for stress, and I'm taking care of myself. And again, giving other people permission to do that for them too.
Really strikes me out of what you're saying, and I so agree with that in a foundation of that relational tone in the work that we do. But you and I, we've all been in those workplaces where the task needs to get done and the deadline is there, the hamster wheel is going. And I see, honestly, in my work, the real stress that comes between the tension of holding space and asking for help and the time that little bit of extra care needs, and the demands, the deadline, the to-dos, the overwhelm. What recommendations or advice would you give for leaders in navigating that tension and intentionally slowing the pace down to hold space for these very human?
That is a very good question and a very good point, where that is the reality in many situations. Regardless of the field that you lead in, where it feels almost like you're giving up something, sacrificing, or maybe doing a disservice to your team if you do take those moments or those times. I think based on the traditional way, or maybe call it old school way of looking at things, where you push yourself to the brink and then you need to take a couple of weeks, couple of months off to recharge, recuperate, because you're at the cusp of burnout. And what I teach through the workshops and the clinics that I provide is it doesn't have to be that way. Those micro moments, whether it's a couple minutes at a time, whether it's a half day, something manageable that you can incorporate into your regular schedule, that's what prevents you from having to hit that wall and needing weeks or months to be able to recuperate. And what you gain by dedicating a couple of minutes, an hour, a half day on a regular basis in a consistent and meaningful way is the long-term continuity of what you're being able to do, let alone the other impacts, what we've talked about, the modeling, be human, giving other people permission to take care of themselves. And it's the common fallacy. Have you ever heard of the experiment that they've done with children, where they have two offerings? They can either have two marshmallows, one marshmallow now or two marshmallows in the future. And most of the children pick the one marshmallow now. They just want that marshmallow. And the idea of having to wait half an hour or another hour for those two marshmallows just doesn't seem like something they want to do. I don't believe that we're too far removed from our childlike selves in some sense. Maybe we might have a different relationship with one versus two marshmallows, but the equivalent in the workplace of, okay, if I can just get this task done now, if I can just finish this project, if I can just do this one more meeting, then I'll take a break later. And then something else gets added to your to-do list. It just keeps getting longer. And that time that you promised yourself to rest and recuperate never comes. And that's why we need to be able to create that consistency, that sustainability, where we are striving for those two marshmallows, in the sense that's the end goal or the benefit in the long run of having that sustainable work that you can feel about, that you don't, you're not risking burnout for. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like that's a great name for a podcast. If you ever decide you're having one, two marshmallows. So you mentioned this already, and I kind of wanted to tie all this in because I think we could talk about this forever, but
a couple of the things that we talk about specifically is obviously neurodiversity and generational diversity. And so I'm a little bit curious, if you're reflecting on that, how did those two things show up in that trauma-informed approach? And especially for leaders, I mean, you've got maybe a leader could be a boomer or they could be a Gen Xer, right? And maybe they're also ADHD. And there's always layers. And I think that's one of the things we talk about is really honoring the fact that there's many, many layers. But how do you see that intersection between those kinds of diversities and the trauma-informed piece? Because I think that that's a really key angle for a lot of people who tend to listen to us.
Definitely. I think that is a very important, also complex question because I see so many layers. Maybe Nicki could speak to the generational piece of things where when we think about generational trauma, what generationally we've been exposed to and how we've been taught or the permissions we've had to be able to explore support, treatment, depending on how been impacted by it is different. And that's going to create a difference in how we lead. What's processed, what's unprocessed, what are the things that we've been hiding away or not talking about that are now coming out in our behaviors or reactions or responses to things. One example is a leader that I was working with who lived through abuse and neglect in their childhood, something that they had not talked about outside of the childhood now that they're in their 40s, 50s of an experience. And the feedback that they received, which led them to me, was from their staff that said, I believe my boss is just too controlling. I don't want to stay in this department or I don't want to stay in that space because I can't handle the micromanagement. And obviously the leader took it very personally. Like, that's not my goal to be controlling or micromanaging. I wasn't even aware that I was doing this. And then as we're going back through the layers where those, first the perception and where those behaviors are coming from, of course, flip it back to all of those child experiences through early adulthood into their leadership. Thank goodness for different opportunities for self-awareness, self-reflection. It's a whole other conversation for another day in terms of how we structure those surveys and how we engage people in the reflection and feedback. But I think is an example of the stuff that we carry with us. And until we're presented with an opportunity to change, it's going to stay there and it's going to come out in our practices, well intended as we might be. And being able to engage them in a focus group and sit in on their staff meetings to help people understand and illuminate these behaviors creates such an opportunity to use those challenges for further growth and trust building. Because conflict isn't a bad thing. We're not meant to be perfect people or perfect leaders. There's no such thing. And sometimes that is a wonderful opportunity to improve and seek out professional and personal development opportunities that we might not have otherwise sought out. And again, it creates a very human atmosphere within the team that you are leading to say, I didn't realize that what I was doing was coming across as controlling. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. Here is what I've taken from what you shared with me, and here's what I to do together. Here's what I'll do on my own. Of course, it doesn't mean that we need to trauma dump all over everybody. Explain why we might be more reactive or why we might be more controlling. But again, to receive that feedback with humility rather than feel like it's a challenge or a slight or taking it personally. Because trauma isn't our fault. It's what we've experienced. It's how our nervous system is internalized and been impacted by it. We don't necessarily have control over any of that. But we do have control over how we receive the information, how we continue to self-reflect, and how we continue to shift those behaviors for the betterment of ourselves and the betterment of our team. Mm-hmm. And the more understanding that you have of yourself and others, your team of you and you of your team, the more that you can coordinate your strengths, your challenges, and support each other together.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable insight. I know that when we reflect on what traumas we're at higher risk for depending on who we are, right? So someone who is ADHD, for example, someone who's neurodivergent, there's a lot of those that come from things like the feedback that's provided through childhood and growth. In fact, I was just reading a study the other day that talked about for those who are autistic, the rates of others who tended to avoid connection with them was significantly higher.
Yeah.
So there's that trauma of isolation that comes up. And, those might seem like very personal pieces, but I've always said that who you are in your personal life is who you are in your work life. You can try and hide it, but it leaks through.
Yeah.
It can come shining through or it can come leaking through. I do think that recognizing that those kinds of very specific levels of trauma genuinely affect how we engage with people. RSD is such a common experience for people who are neurodivergent, right? So rejection sensitive dysphoria, there is this intense emotional response. So it might seem like it's an overblown response to criticism or it being ignored or judgment or something along those lines. And so what does that look like? As a leader, if I'm offended by something, am I aware that that's my own internal interpretation, but that's not the reality on the outside? Do I have the wherewithal to check that and be able to reflect on that? Do that reflective, okay, where is this coming from? Right, I recognize this. And there's so many other instances where we might see that showing up. But as leaders, we don't take that time to think back to what are the things that trigger me? What are the things that cause me discomfort? What are the things that upset me? What are the things that make me angry? What are your pet peeves? And for neurodivergence specifically, and I'm going to check in with Nicki in a second because I want to talk about the generational piece, but for neurodivergence especially, we live very values-based. And those are ones that tend to be rooted in things like justice. And so you can see how in those kinds of environments that can become very elevated very quickly. So yeah, I think those are really good insights. I want to ask Nicki, what do you think when you think about trauma and how do you relate those in the generations, do you think?
Well, I think there is such a distinct difference in how different generations approach the idea of trauma. Older generations were steeped in that kind of stoic mentality of you pick up your bootstraps and you keep going, right? Yeah. Like you don't have time for feelings because you're going to get stuck and then you're going to be dead. And, coming out of post-war, that's understandable. And there's also some real complication of stuffing and not actually seeing and holding with tenderness that very real pain that you experience. And sometimes, we as humans are so very skilled at performing in a function, which really impacts authenticity. And what I'm seeing across the generations is that our younger generations have kind of swung that emotional intelligence pendulum, and there's different emotional intelligence skills that they are very keen on, which is that authenticity, that transparency, that being able to disclose that I navigate ADHD in my life. Yeah. Well, that older generation, you just didn't do that because you got fired. You just didn't do that because you were publicly shamed. You just didn't do that because you were less than. Yeah. And yet younger generations see the value of that, see the humanity in that, see how that actually helps us form connection. And some of the complexity is that growth that you said, that post-traumatic growth is a struggle for them because sometimes they get stuck in that victimhood. They get stuck in that trauma. And so this is where the generational perspectives become so valuable because we need some of that. We can get through this and this doesn't have to define us. Insight from the stoic and that stoic mentality. And we need that ability to hold space for authenticity and transparency and struggle that our younger generations. So we really need all generations bringing their insights to the table on it, which is a really complicating factor. I think that's why I have a job, right? Because we're struggling.
I think that's why we all have a job.
Touche. And
A lot of work to do.
really, I think what I'm really coming aware of in this conversation is the assumption that I don't have trauma and you. And I heard someone the other day invite those who are listening not just to be trauma informed, but to take the position of trauma assumed. And I love your take on that, because their kind of idea was this is don't assume everybody's fine and there are some people with trauma. But instead, take the position that most people probably have trauma.
Yeah.
And what is your take on that?
I am of two minds of that on that topic when it comes to trauma informed, trauma assumed. If you had asked me 5 years ago, I might have had a different answer for you. Short of it today, I believe that is the safer approach. When it comes to assuming, not that you're trying to guess at what kind of trauma people have experienced, whether it's acute trauma, generational trauma, or racial trauma, or any of those themes, but more that it orients our brains to empathy and orients our brains to that idea or the metaphor of the iceberg, where there's so much believed beneath the surface that you can't just assume that what a person says, how they're coming across, how they're engaging is a result of that conversation in a vacuum. What happened to them that day, what happened the day before, and the years leading up to it have all informed who they are. It's important to them, like you said, the values and how they're coming across, what their strengths are, what their struggles are, insecurities, and otherwise. And when we assume or create a baseline of trauma or assume that everybody's got trauma, I read that as we are assuming that everybody's human, that they've been through something that has informed who they are today. We might not know what that is. We might never know what that is, but it is okay to address people, approach conversations, connect with people with compassion. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's a positive direction to head, especially in leadership, especially when it comes to organizations who have really strict HR practices that can often get lost when you're trying to be as by the book as you can. It doesn't leave a lot of room to understand what's beneath the iceberg for staff and individuals. But what's beneath the iceberg can help you help them contribute to the organization in such a meaningful way, rather than potentially having to go with people who are actually really positive and benefit to your company because structure or of insight as to how to support them. You might never have the opportunity for them to contribute in the way that they might have been able to if you were able to take a look at their responses, their support needs, and give them a platform to be a human in those conversations.
You know, as you're talking about that, it really helps, I think, to think about for leaders, what do we do with this? Because I recognize, and this comes up in many of our conversations, the stuff that we talk about, there are those leaders out there who are like, oh, okay, this is fluffy stuff and doesn't pertain to me. And I think the real kind of crux of what it is that we want out of the conversations we have is how do we, make this something that stands up as, no, this doesn't apply to you and every one of you. And it's not about fluffy stuff, right? This isn't this woke culture stuff. These are the humans who work for you. Mm-hmm. So, as we're wrapping up and we're thinking, okay, now what do I do with this great information? What do you think is the way that we can get that message through, that this trauma piece is really key for leaders, for employers, for teams to be thinking about how do they incorporate this in, or how do they respect this in dealing with their colleagues, peers, staff?
Mm-hmm. I think my answer to that is probably longer than we have time for, so I'll try to respond as succinctly as possible. I've been at the crux of it to create a tangible understanding about how that trauma-informed lens can support leaders and is beneficial for organizations is first to take a look at what your metrics are. whether you're completely revamping your metrics and what you're looking at, or creating additional metrics to what you're already paying attention to understand the flow and the progression of the work that you're doing. Being able to, again, going back to that two marshmallow analogy, knowing that you're not looking for specific week to week change. This is a long-term play. This is a long-term shift. And you might start to see some differences within months, years, in terms of applying that trauma-informed lens, just when it comes to how conversations are playing out, how you feel connected to your team. And to your point about those generational pieces, where there are generations who were taught and leave your personal life at home and just put a mask on and come to work and do what you got to do. Now transitioning to people who were born in the 2000s, in their early 20s, joining the workforce, who are understanding that want to feel good about the work that they do. They don't just want to do a good job. And how do we integrate metrics that respect and honor both the job and feeling about the work that you do? I think that's where the sustainability is. And I think that's where we will achieve the most productivity. We'll reduce burnout, and we will help create engaged staff members, engaged teams that can feel excited, contributing to not just the work and their role within the confines of the job description that they've been provided, but actually want to contribute to the mission, vision, values of the greater organization, where they can feel heard, they can feel supported, and it doesn't feel like they're going above and beyond or being asked to push further outside of their job description. It feels like it's a community of people supporting people. Going back to your question in terms of how do you make it tangible, I think being able to address the culture survey work, does that look like? What metrics are you measuring? And being able to really understand yourself and how that helps you understand your team. There are specific trainings, there are specific conversations and specific tools that can help you navigate to make that as concrete as possible. Also, the proof will be in daily navigation, how you feel about the work that you're doing and the sustainability that you are able to achieve. And it might feel like a risk to take at the very beginning. We're challenging our biases, we're challenging our way of doing things. But I think I like to say that when things change. And being able to, and with that, will make this a role for everyone to work in.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate immensely your insights, but also just the care that you bring to what impacts people. I know that you're very passionate and compassionate. So glad to have you with us today. Anything as we wrap up? Any last thoughts quickly, Nicki?
I want to extend thanks as well. I appreciate the nuance, the humanity, and just the invitation to be more thoughtful in not only the responsibility we're taking for our inner world, but the space we're holding for others to do the same. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and thank you for having me and engaging me in this helpful conversation. I love the opportunity to reflect and to be able to share thoughts as well. And thanks again for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. That's it for us for today. But we will look forward to having Kathleen join us again, I'm sure, someday in the future. Thanks for joining us on the Dissonance Disrupted podcast. We believe conversations don't end here, they begin here. If today sparked something for you, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your network.
And if you want to connect with us about today's show, we would love to hear from you. Visit us at www.dissonancedisrupted.ca for show notes, contact information, and more. Be sure to bring your coffee and join us next time on the Dissonance Disrupted podcast. Chat soon.
Dissonance Disrupted is a collaborative podcast created and hosted by Nicki Straza of Straza Solutions and Sherri Dockery of Mindwave Co. and administrative support by Shaylin Wilson.